It's 9:30 p.m. on the west coast of the United States. It is 0430 GMT. It's cBas After Dark for the last night of the week. It's Thursday. It's actually graduation Thursday. There's a lot of graduation events going on for high schools in the area where I am currently. So I wanted to make it kind of a wrap it up situation. I actually came from one place where I had to go to graduation party kind of a thing, and I've got more stuff going on tonight. So rather than try and skip the episode, I did want to sort of bring it to you. Oh, I forgot the phone number, didn't I? The area code is 310. The phone number is 776-COONS. That's 776-5869. You can call me or tweet me anytime. If you're live during the show, I especially appreciate that. Maybe send me a text if you'd rather not be on the phone with me. Or you can send me a tweet at the number, a number. This is like an old person saying, yeah, send me your email number. You can send me a tweet at the number on your screen. You can send me a text message at the address here. Whatever. What's coming up tonight's pretty interesting. I learned something a little bit ago. Sometimes I do a sort of pot-themed hour just before I go on the air here. And the pot-themed hour I did tonight was actually pretty interesting. And I learned something I did not know before. One iron-fisted regime in the world, known for being just brutal to its citizens, and pretty brutal to people who come visit as far as tourism as well, in some cases, is surprisingly liberal, like mind-bogglingly liberal, when it comes to its issues related to pot, marijuana. And I felt like, well, that's an interesting topic that's so mind-blowing, I needed to bring it to you here. So we'll talk about that first thing. Also, other stories I was going to tell you about, including all the news that is fit to print. Well, that doesn't tell us anything, does it? The 10 countries that will see marijuana legalization before too much more time goes by. The 10 countries that smoke the most marijuana. Another interesting sort of topic that I'm going to talk about. 10 things your hair says about you, according to research, as we shift into the psychology portion of our show. And is there a masculinity crisis? One psychologist says yes, and he says the reason for the masculinity crisis in the United States is porn addiction and video game addiction. I'm already thinking it's a bunch of crap, aren't you? But the funny thing is, I've interviewed the psychologist who this is coming from, and before I interviewed him to be on my old radio show back in San Francisco, I actually really revered the guy. He's a well-known psychologist and has done a very famous experiment that lends to him a certain amount of credibility. Now, whether or not he's just an old man sort of theorizing out his ass, which it sounds like he may be here, is one side of it. Another side is that he's a highly respected for many decades psychologist at Stanford. There's a hint. And it may be that he's sort of both a highly qualified psychologist at Stanford University on one hand, and an old man just sort of blithering out his ass on the other hand. Maybe two sides of the same coin. It's all coming up in the next hour here on cBas After Dark. Join me, call me, text me, tweet me. Okay. Or comment on the video. There's comments available below. I get notified instantly of all these different methods, and we'll deal with them and treat them. If you're in the Trekkie chat, by the way, hello to you. I will try to check in the Trekkie chat and deal with any questions, concerns, topics, or things that come up in there as well. Okay, let's start with the story I promised to bring to you first. Which country has, okay, well, there's me ruining the news story I was going to bring to you. And that's just ruining it. But here we go. This is the story I wanted to bring to you. When it comes to marijuana, North Korea has a liberal policy of tolerance. Let's see here. I just need to make sure I mention to the folks that we're on the air live at this time. But yeah, imagine what kind of mindfuck it's got to be. What kind of really bizarre world we live in where North Korea, the most iron-fisted regime we have to offer in the world, I think it's probably safe to say, at least in one sense or another, has a liberal policy of tolerance regarding weed. Marijuana in North Korea is not treated as a drug. According to multiple reports from defectors, visitors, and experts, North Korea either has no law against the sale and consumption of weed, or it has a law that's largely unenforced. Just last week, a 29-year-old freelance writer from England. Now, again, this is not really last week. This is from October 2013. So it's a year and a half ago now. But a 29-year-old freelance writer from England wrote an account on his blog explaining how he purchased a grocery bag full of weed. There's a picture. At an indoor market in rural North Korea and smoked it with impunity both at outdoor parks and monuments, as well as restaurants and bars. The writer, Darman Richter, lives in Bulgaria. He also described how the group's regime-appointed minder smoked the marijuana with him and his fellow tourists. Richter told the Huffington Post the guide said weed is legal in North Korea. So I cannot be the only one finding this mind-boggling. For one thing, it's a year and a half old. It's a year and a half since the Huffington Post wrote about it. And still, this is not a story I remember hearing break wide open at all, but it does appear to be, corroborated by multiple sources here, and I suspect it's actually probably true. Of course, just because a group of tourists does it doesn't mean it's legal for North Korean citizens to do it, as this article points out, but other reports seem to actually substantiate the notion that pot in what's known as the Hermit Kingdom is neither criminalized nor even frowned upon. A 2010 report for an NGO, Open Radio for North Korea, cited an anonymous North Korean source as saying Kim Jong-un's regime does not consider marijuana to be a drug. Experts speaking to HuffPost explained it's unknown whether the drug is technically illegal, but either way, in practice, the regime doesn't appear to take an issue with it. Cannabis grows wildly in North Korea and is even sold abroad by government agencies as a way for it to earn foreign currency. It's not clear whether the law is on the books officially, but in any case, marijuana, known as yoksam in North Korea, is not prioritized by the government and therefore not treated as an illegal drug. With regards to marijuana in North Korea, it's as good as legal. There is no great stigma about it, nor does it have the same sort of fetish that surrounds it in the West. I like that term, the fetish surrounding marijuana in the West, which probably stems from its illegal status here. Last year on the social news site Reddit, an American consultant who said he's traveled to North Korea every year since 2008 said while he was in North Korea, he and his group came across North Korean citizens growing marijuana in small gardens. It seemed to be used mostly as a medicine. Imagine that, just for a second. Let's just stop for a second. Stop reading the article, stop everything. And think about what if it were a country where this plant had not been made illegal for many, many years. What if I've said for a long time that I think the paranoia that people associate with pot is largely based on its illegal status and it's a criminal thing to have rather than an actual side effect of the drug itself. You're paranoid when you smoke pot because you're breaking the law, not because of something inherent to the pot. Different people experience the high of pot in different ways. There's more than one kind of pot. There's a million asterisks and a million ways in which you can slice that pie. But I've often said that, the paranoia may not be from the pot, it may be from the legal status. But think about that. Sort of like when I learned about Al Jazeera News. Imagine a TV channel that does the news that's not chasing ratings. A news channel that has so much money, they can cover whatever they damn well please. Now, whether they're fair and balanced or unbiased or not is another question, but if they're not chasing ratings, that's something we don't have in this country. We don't have a TV news channel that can do what it wants because it's just rich. And that, I just think it's one of those mind fucks that's like, holy shit. What would it be like if we were in a country where pot was okay? It was no big deal. It was just like alcohol or tobacco, or even less stigmatized than that because it's seen as a medicine. It's just something that grows. It's a weed that grows in mountains and valleys and every place. What if? My mind was blown when I saw this thing about North Korea. Of all the things it's known for, is completely. I looked at the article. There's a Wikipedia page about the status of pot in countries around the world. All this long column of. I should even show it to you. And the crazy thing about it, do we have it here? Yeah, legality of cannabis by country on Wikipedia. Now, we won't look at the whole thing, but it's 4 boxes, right? Each country on the left here, and then possession, sale, transport, and cultivation. So is it illegal to possess? Is it illegal to sell? Is it illegal to have in your car when you're moving? Is it illegal to grow pot? Now, you go down this, when you see it's yellow, it's illegal but decriminalized. When you see it red, it's completely illegal. When you see it green, it's legal. And you don't see a lot of green, obviously. I mean, green is a green light thing, but it's also a pot thing, so that's kind of amusing. In Germany, yellow across the board, illegal but legal if you have permission from the medical folks. The Czech Republic, also yellow across the board. India, also yellow across the board, illegal, but there are cases where it's okay. Jamaica, you can grow up to 5 plants legally, but not the rest of it. Netherlands, it's green but yellow in some places. Okay. North Korea, green across the board. Does that not blow your mind? I'm sorry. Is that not the biggest mind fuck? I'm sorry. I realize maybe I'm fixated on it a little bit. You keep going down, you don't see a lot of green elsewhere, but there is one or two. Uruguay is the other thing. In fact, I saw an article on CNN in the other show about Uruguay, and it's actually completely legal newly so there as of like 2013, late December 2013, but only for Uruguayans. So if you're going to do tourist pot there, you can't do it. You have to be like, I mean, maybe you could probably find it and get it, but it's still against the law technically. For it to be the legal thing, it's legal for Uruguayans in Uruguay, and that's just the beginning and end of it. I find it fascinating to look at this from a global perspective because we have it in this country, legal in a couple places, medical in a couple of places. There's we're wrestling with it. We're sort of becoming more sophisticated and more knowledgeable and more bigger fish to fry, if you will. But the fact that Uruguay, North Korea, green across the board, it blows my mind. Let's look at the top 10 countries that smoke the most weed because I think that's another really interesting metric to look at. Won't be about weed the entire time, I promise. Just a couple more minutes. UN just released its World Drug Report for 2014. This is about a year old, maybe not quite. The top 10 countries that smoke the most pot. Number 10, Jamaica. Just under 10% of the population. Not really shocking there. 9, Australia, 10.3% of the population. I think that's a little more surprising. 8, Spain, 10.6. 7, Canada, 12.2%. 6, Nigeria, 14.3%. Number 5, New Zealand, 14.6%. It's illegal in New Zealand, but 14.6 still do it. Number 4, Italy, 14.6% also. Number 3, the U.S., 14.8%. Who beats us? Zambia with 17% of the population and Iceland with 18.3% of the population. So, yeah. The U.S. is legal in 22 states for medical use, plus D.C., legal in Colorado and Washington. I believe a couple of other states have actually joined Colorado and Washington in that as well. And the other sort of top 10 thing I wanted to talk about as far as pot was concerned before I change the channel here on you and run off to do my graduation night festivities for my friends who are graduating from school. CheatSheet.com, the 10 countries leading the push for international legal marijuana. Number 10, or I guess this is just 10 countries, so it's not like a top 10 from David Letterman, but the Czech Republic is getting a grasp, but it is improving for Czech citizens where you can actually grow up to 5 plants or be in possession of a certain amount without being prosecuted. Prague isn't earning the title of New Amsterdam for nothing. Country 2 on this 10-country list, Ecuador. Again, a little bit surprising, I feel like. 3, Jamaica. Many people thought marijuana was already legal. It's not true, but they are relaxing their laws. And again, if you look at the picture here, this is apparently a giant joint. Just from a purely, this is completely, judgmental perspective on my part. It's completely subjective as well. I don't feel like I'm amused by joints bigger than your head. Or for that matter, hamburgers bigger than you can fit in your mouth, but certainly a joint bigger than your head or one of those 3-pronged joints that's like a cross. I find that a little bit on the silly side. Like, you don't need that much pot to get high at all. And frankly, I feel like it's a little bit wasteful in a very serious, real way. Okay. Country 4, Mexico. I think this is fascinating because having been in Mexico for about a year teaching there, many of the people in Mexico are against weed because in particular of the cartel violence that is there. Now, again, it's overblown by the media to a certain degree, and it's only in some parts of Mexico to a very seriously large degree. It's only in certain parts. But the overwhelming mental thought process in Mexico that pot is bad because of the cartel violence, it's one of the few places where I give anti-pot sentiment a pass. If you lost a couple of family members, either innocently or because they were in a cartel, to cartel drug violence, I can see how you're going to think, whether it's logical or rational or not, that pot is something to be criminalized. It's something we should be against. And if you lost a couple people in your family, again, especially innocently, because many people are killed innocently when it comes to that cartel violence. If you're in a cartel, you got to know what's coming to a certain degree. But anyway, I do give certain folks in Mexico a pass on being anti-pot. But it does look like in this list here that Mexico is one of the countries that might see a change in the law. Mexican leaders, it says, may be swayed to vote for legalization if it means a lessening of violence and corruption, which a lot of sort of sentiment these days suggests it will. 5, Canada. Again, places like British Columbia are famous worldwide for supposedly growing some of the finest pot in the world. I don't think I knew that either. Majority of Canadian citizens want to see it legalized. Policymakers there will probably look at what the U.S. does and act accordingly. Again, the New Amsterdam is also some places in Spain, depending on who you ask. It operates in a somewhat gray area within Spanish law. These private clubs take advantage of new decriminalization laws. So there you have it. Uruguay regular. Number 7, Uruguay. We talked about Uruguay a moment ago. They're on this list here of, where is it? Did I close it already? No, it's here. Uruguay is the one where it's newly legal across the board if you're in Uruguay. The market itself will be tightly regulated by the government. If you're Uruguayan, you can get it anytime you want it. Some estimates put Uruguayan marijuana at just 87 cents per gram compared to $10 to $30 per gram in the States here. Netherlands, more specifically Amsterdam. I mean, most people, again, think it's pretty much legal there, but it's recently they changed some laws to make it harder. Number 9, Argentina. Large rallies and protests urging lawmakers to reclassify it as a legal substance. And last but not least, India. Kind of the only non-Western Europe or South American country on the list, but Indians are surprisingly open, this article says, to the possibility of legalizing pot. It's already widely used in religious Hindu ceremonies as well, which is, again, something I did not know. But as we're all becoming increasingly educated, I think it's something worth knowing. And I think it's also really fascinating that North Korea, the iron fist of all iron-fisted regimes in modern culture, Kim Jong-un, for Christ's sake, it's complete. I mean, if you missed that article at the beginning, you missed really something, because holy shit, not only is it apparently legal, but like the people who've gone there and smoked it with the government person they send with you, I forget the word that they call it. They send a government person to kind of monitor what you do, smoking weed with the person who's there from the government monitoring you. Like, it's no sort of, again, whether or not you can do it or can afford to do it if you're a North Korean person, citizen, whatever, is another topic, but it does grow wild there. So it's not like it is not considered a criminal plant there. I mean, to come from this country, it really skews your thinking, I think, in a lot of ways. All right, let's change gears a little bit. 12 minutes before the top of the hour, I guess now 11 minutes before the top of the hour. Time magazine says your hair says things about you. Let's look really fast at this. I like that guy's haircut. Scientific research has shown that blondes make more money, raise more money, and gentlemen prefer them. Being well-groomed is correlated with better grades. Good grooming is associated with higher wages if you're a man, not if you're a woman. And if you're ugly and underpaid, definitely shave. I like that. Women who remove their pubic hair have better sexual function. Hear, hear, I hear my straight brothers cry. A number of factors go into whether a girl is attracted to men with hairy chests. Dyeing your hair makes you feel younger, and looking young helps you stay young. Men are more likely to date women with the same hair color as their mom. Okay, that's scary and weird. Beards equal sociable. Mustaches equal introverted. Stubble wins in both the smart and social categories. Let's hear it for stubble. Redheads are seen as dumber than blondes. Women with dyed hair or short hair are seen as extroverted. Bald men are perceived as intelligent. and shaving your head makes you look tougher. Well, that's not surprising at all. But again, good old Time magazine with a list on what your hair says about you. I just think some of these things are really, really fascinating. Did I miss that other thing about pot? No, I guess I got all the stuff about pot. By the way, I do an occasional show about pot, and it's actually pretty interesting, so watch this space for the links to it. Now, the last article I really wanted to bring to you on Anything Can Happen Thursday. By the way, call in, text in, tweet in, comment in, send me all your feedback however you can. Let's take a second. I never really do this. Let's look at the Trekkie chat and see if there's anything in the Trekkie chat that's directed at me. I guess not. I guess everybody have figured out that it's kind of a lost cause to try and talk to me in the Trekkie chat because I never really remember to look in it. And now the time I remember to look in it, there's not a thing here for me. Okay, well, that's fine. But masculinity crisis. Is there a masculinity crisis? One psychologist says yes, and he's not a small potato psychologist. He's actually a serious psychologist with some druthers and with some credentials. He's the guy who did the prison experiment in Stanford, the famous prison experiment that had to be aborted partway through because the prisoners were acting too much like prisoners, and the guards especially were acting way too much like guards and were abusing. These are all students acting out roles, and the roles got so carried away that they had to abort this experiment. Philip Zimbardo's his name. A lot of people know that name from that experiment, and I interviewed him one time. He says there's a masculinity crisis, and he says porn and video game addiction is the reason why. Let's look at the full article here on the BBC story rather than this sort of meta article. Independent.co.uk says Stanford psychologist, porn and stuff are making a masculinity crisis. He's got a new book, Man Disconnected, so maybe that's part of why he's saying this, is he's shopping a book. But you know, in a way, before we get to the article, like, you got to think about it. Could it be that porn being out there as freely as it is now compared to what it used to be like, which was, you know, magazines under, you know, your bed, or, you know, it was very much more difficult to come by, to just say it as simply as possible. It was not as easy. It was not as ubiquitous. It was not everywhere the way it is now. It feels like a change that happened in a rather short period of time. Suddenly porn is everywhere on the internet, and it never was 25, 50 years ago. It seems like that change would take longer to happen for there to be a masculinity crisis that comes from that. If it were to have an effect at all, it would take a lot longer, you would think. But this psychologist says, maybe not. Let's look through this article. For that matter, video game addiction, would that have an effect? I feel like that would have an effect on violence, and we are in a more violent culture than we used to be. But again, wouldn't that take longer? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, enough blabbing. The article. Philip Zimbardo made the warnings which form a major part of his latest book. The BBC interview, he spoke about the results of his study, which is an in-depth look into the lives of 20,000 young men and their relationships with video games and porn. He said, our focus is on young men who play video games to excess and do it in social isolation. They are alone in their room. Now with freely available pornography, which is unique in history, I said that a second ago, they're combining playing video games and as a break, watching on average 2 hours of porn a week. That sounds like a lot. I don't even watch that much porn a week. Zimbardo says there's a crisis amongst young men, a high number of whom are experiencing a new form of addiction to excessive use of pornography and video games. This is a TED Talk. You want to watch a piece of this just to see if it sounds bizarre or not? Let's just watch a piece of it here. Oh, we're going to get an ad. Are we going to get an ad? Maybe not. It seems like there's a bit of a lag going on, and I don't know if my computer is to blame or not, but maybe we shouldn't bother with this. He gave a TED Talk in 2011 outlining the problems facing young men's social development and academic achievement, which he puts down to excessive use of porn, video games, and the internet. He cited the example of a mother he met while conducting the study whose son does not see the problem in playing 15 hours of video games a day. He said, for me, excess is not the number of hours, it's the psychological change in mindset. Giving an example of the mindset of a gaming and pornography-addicted young man, he says, when I'm in class, I wish I was playing World of Warcraft. When I'm with a girl, I wish I was watching porn, because I'll never get rejected. He claims that this relatively new phenomenon is affecting the minds of young men. Okay. I guess brought to us by Swiffer, but citing the research he and his team conducted for the book, he says it begins to change brain function. It begins to change the reward center of the brain and produces a kind of excitement and addiction. What I'm saying, boys' brains are becoming digitally rewired. He also mentioned the growing problem of disputed phenomenon called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. Think about that. PIDE. Young boys who should be virile are now having a problem getting an erection. You have this paradox, he says. They're watching exciting videos that should be turning them on, and they can't get turned on. But an article from Psychology Today argues there are no demonstrable scientific links between porn consumption and erectile dysfunction. In his opinion, the solution is to accept that the problem is serious. Parents must become aware of the number of hours a kid is spending alone in their room playing games and watching porn at the expense of other activities. He also blamed negative images of men in the American media, which show men as being slobs, undesirable, only wanting to get laid, and being inadequate at doing that. That's kind of amusing in a way. If it's true, it's not that amusing, I don't think. Is this video ever going to play? Perhaps not, but you got to wonder, You got to wonder. It's sort of like what if we were in a country where pot had never been illegal? Would we see it as as much of a fetish? The word from the article I like the most is the fetish. We have this fetish about it. There's these weird reactions and feelings and thought processes and stuff that goes along with pot. Would there be paranoia about pot if pot had never been illegal? I think that's something worth considering. I don't know if studying it would ever result in any real answers, and I don't know if it's an answer we could ever really get, but I feel like it's worth thinking about, certainly. Let's look at news articles regarding people who play video games until they die, because that was something, and I've covered this for almost 10 years now. Sorry, maybe I could take care of my scratching problem before I go on the air. But there have been a number of news stories. We're just going to go news. This is something spontaneous I'm doing right now. Died from video game playing. Now, it wasn't in this country. Video game execution watched. Okay, well, that's not really what I want. What was it? Teen dies from video. Let's see here. In video game house. I think it was in an Asian country. I'm not going to be able to pull this up, am I? There was a teenager, at least 2 different stories I've seen, where a kid died, like playing video games straight for like 48 hours or something like that. It was really insane. Person dies 30 hours video game, like... I'm just looking for it. I should have. I didn't think I wanted to cover this until just now. Person dies hours video game, or like, what is the search term I should try and have here? It wasn't in this country the most popular story, but there was a story of a kid who died, like in one of those arcades or coffee houses where video games can be played, and I think they're 24 hours in places like maybe Hong Kong, but I don't think that was it either. I had a discussion with it on a talk show with a guy I was co-hosting a show with like 10 years ago. Was it? It was 2005. And I remember going, he was astounded that such a thing could happen. And he was also astounded that I thought that maybe violent video game, first-person shooter games and so on, maybe we're going to show an effect one of these days on the amount of violence in culture, the amount of kids who find it easy to just go kill people. I still don't think there have been any real science articles that back that up, but I feel like psychologically speaking, it's valid. even though there isn't science yet. I feel like these are changes, kind of like the masculinity crisis coming from porn addiction. And that's something that I think is psychologically valid, but I don't think it could have happened this fast, if that makes any sense. Well, it's been a half an hour. I usually go for an hour. I could keep going with just news stories that I find interesting, blah, 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 but I feel like rather than extend it and sit here beating my meat, if you will, I'd rather call it a week. I've got some places to go and some people to congratulate on graduating. So rather than make a big deal out of it, we'll say, hey, it's been a great week. Do remember to join us. Usually we're going on the air at this time, 10 o'clock p.m. on the West Coast, 0500 GMT. If you don't know the math involved, then you can do it from the West Coast of the U.S. 10 o'clock on the West Coast, 1 a.m. East Coast time is when I'm usually going on the air. Let me check the Trekkie chat room one more time to see if anybody is going on. Doesn't look like anybody's talking to me. Well, hello, Bill and Rick and Sal and Alienate and Zeb in the chat room. Make it a great weekend. Don't forget the fast food, junk food extravaganza every night, Saturday night, that is, every Saturday night at the same time on many of these same cBas After Dark stations. Make it a great night. I'm Sebastian. This is cBas After Dark. It is Anything Can Happen Thursday, and good night.